For decades, America believed in the myth of Hollywood's golden age. It was supposed to be the era of elegance, moral clarity, and pure cinematic brilliance, a time before scandal became currency and before fame was manufactured in real time. The stars seemed larger than life, yet somehow cleaner, nobler, untouched by the chaos we associate with modern celebrity culture. But what if that image was never real? What if the Golden Age was not a time of innocence, but a time of better control? For 30 years, Johnny Carson sat at the center of American television. Night after night, the biggest names in Hollywood crossed his stage. They laughed under the lights, told polished stories, and reinforced the mythology millions of viewers wanted to believe. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the studio audience went home, the conversations changed. Behind closed doors, away from microphones and applause, the carefully constructed illusions often unraveled. Carson developed a reputation as the industry's most trusted confidant. Former producers and network insiders have suggested that stars told him things they would never say publicly, especially about how careers were really built during the studio era, not through talent alone, but through power, through silence, through relationships that were never written into contracts. The casting couch was not whispered rumor, it was an open secret. Morality clauses controlled public behavior, while private arrangements were quietly tolerated. Agents protected images, gossip columnists shaped narratives, and studios maintained an elaborate system designed to preserve profitability above all else. Everyone knew something, few said anything. So the question is not whether Hollywood had secrets. The question is, if so many people understood how the system worked, why did the illusion survive? Tonight, we step beyond the legend and examine the Golden Age not as a fairy tale, but as a collective performance, one sustained not only by studios and stars, but by silence itself. Before she became Marilyn Monroe, she was Norma Jean, a struggling contract player in a studio system that had little patience for uncertainty and even less tolerance for female autonomy. The mythology would later frame her rise as inevitable, the blonde bombshell discovered, polished, and launched into global stardom. But inevitability is often just a story told after the fact. In the studio era, opportunity was rarely neutral. Roles were assigned through hierarchies shaped by producers, executives, agents, and the quiet expectations that rarely appeared in writing. Industry veterans have long acknowledged that the casting couch was not an anomaly but a structural feature, a currency operating parallel to talent. Carson, according to former associates, understood that distinction. He knew which careers were propelled by craft and which were accelerated by access. Monroe's early years at 20th Century Fox were marked by instability. She was suspended more than once, labeled difficult, even expendable. Yet those same years were filled with rumored relationships with powerful men, photographers, agents, and executives who could open doors that otherwise remained shut. The public saw a breathless persona. Insiders saw negotiations, but Monroe was not merely a passive participant in a corrupt system. By 1955, she did something nearly unheard of for a young actress. She formed her own production company. In doing so, she challenged Fox, demanded better scripts, and secured a salary increase that stunned the industry. If she had once been shaped by the system, she was now attempting to reshape it. That duality fascinated Carson. The image of vulnerability on screen contrasted sharply with reports of strategic intelligence behind the scenes. She cultivated relationships, yes, but she also studied acting seriously in New York, sought validation beyond her physical appeal, and resisted the limitations imposed on her. Still, the cost of navigating that system was psychological as much as professional. The line between performance and authenticity grew dangerously thin. If a persona is constructed for survival, at what point does it consume the person who created it? Rumors later linked her to political figures, including members of the Kennedy family. FBI files would document her associations, feeding speculation that her proximity to power extended beyond Hollywood. Whether every rumor was true is less important than the climate that made such rumors believable. In Golden Age Hollywood, sexuality, influence, and ambition were entangled in ways the public was never meant to see clearly. Carson reportedly did not judge her. He saw her as someone who learned the rules of a compromised game and chose to play it better than most. But he also understood something else. Systems built on transactional relationships rarely allow clean exits. Marilyn Monroe became one of the most recognizable women in the world. She achieved the fame she was told to desire. Yet, if the Golden Age promised protection in exchange for compliance, her story raises a harder question. Was she liberated by mastering the system, or was she ultimately trapped by it? If Marilyn Monroe learned the rules, Joan Crawford mastered them. Long before she became an Academy Award winner, before she married into corporate power, before she was immortalized in both admiration and controversy, she was Lucille LeSueur, a factory worker with no industry connections and no protection in a system built to consume ambition. Hollywood in the 1930s did not reward innocence. It rewarded adaptability. Crawford entered MGM at a time when the studio system functioned like a monarchy. Studio heads determined contracts, publicity, marriages, and morality. Careers were not discovered, they were engineered. According to industry veterans who later spoke privately with Carson, Crawford quickly understood that talent alone would not secure permanence. Influence would. Rumors surrounding her early career have never fully disappeared. Strategic relationships with directors, producers, executives, some documented, others whispered, formed part of her ascent. Unlike actresses who later framed themselves as victims of exploitation, Crawford reportedly approached these dynamics with clinical awareness. She did not deny the currency of intimacy within the studio system. She accounted for it. Carson, insiders claim, viewed her not as naive nor corrupted, but as calculating in the purest sense of the word. She built alliances. She cultivated gossip columnists. She understood the power of image management decades before it became an industry science. And perhaps most controversially, she was rumored to have leveraged relationships not only with men, but with influential women in elite social circles. In an era where homosexuality was concealed and weaponized, proximity to the right social networks could mean career insulation. Power in Hollywood was never singular. It moved through social rooms as much as studio offices. But here is the deeper question. Was Crawford empowered or merely surviving within a rigged system? Her marriage to Alfred Steele, chairman of Pepsi-Cola, marked a transition from screen royalty to corporate authority. She did not simply age out of Hollywood, she repositioned herself. Few actresses managed that pivot. Most were discarded. She restructured. Carson reportedly admired that resilience, not because it was romantic, but because it was unsentimental. Crawford did not wait for fairness. She adapted to unfairness, yet survival carries its own cost. The emotional detachment required to treat relationships as strategy can blur authenticity beyond recognition. When every alliance has professional implications, where does sincerity begin? Her later reputation hardened, controlling, even tyrannical, may reflect more than personality. It may reflect decades spent in a system where vulnerability was weaponized. In Golden Age Hollywood, sentimentality was a liability. If Monroe represented the tragic brilliance of being consumed by the myth, Crawford represented something colder, the refusal to be consumed at all. But which path was more dangerous? To play the game and hope it does not destroy you, or to master it and risk becoming indistinguishable from it? If Joan Crawford mastered the system, Rock Hudson survived by becoming its most convincing illusion. In the 1950s and 1960s, Hudson represented the American ideal of masculine appeal. Tall, confident, romantic, the leading man women adored and men admired. Studios invested millions into that image. It was not merely branding, it was infrastructure. But infrastructure requires maintenance. Behind the scenes, Hudson's private life was carefully managed. Arranged dates with actresses, publicized romances constructed for press consumption. A highly publicized marriage designed to silence speculation. According to industry insiders who later spoke about the era, these measures were not optional suggestions, they were conditions of employment. The studio system did not simply create stars, it manufactured identities. Hudson's agent, Henry Wilson, played a pivotal role in shaping that identity. Wilson was known for discovering young male talent and aggressively crafting marketable personas, but whispers about his methods have lingered for decades. Allegations that early representation often came with expectations not written in contracts. Carson reportedly understood this dynamic clearly. Hudson's predicament, as insiders described Carson framing it, was not about personal orientation alone. It was about economics. A gay leading man was considered commercially unviable in mid-century America. Exposure meant immediate contract termination, moral outrage, and box office collapse. So the lie was maintained collectively. Studio executives protected their investment. Publicists coordinated narratives. Journalists participated through omission. Co-stars maintained discretion. Dozens of people were aware, yet the fiction remained intact. Here lies the uncomfortable truth. The deception was not sustained by one man's secrecy, but by institutional cooperation. But what does it cost to live as a constructed persona? Hudson achieved immense success. Romantic comedies with Doris Day, dramatic roles that reinforced his heterosexual appeal, global fame. Yet the cost of that success was continuous self-surveillance. Every friendship monitored, every rumor suppressed, every public appearance calculated. When he was diagnosed with AIDS decades later, the illusion collapsed overnight. The same industry that once shielded his identity struggled to confront the implications of his death. His passing did more to expose Hollywood's hypocrisy than any scandal during his lifetime. Carson reportedly saw Hudson's story as tragic, not because of sexuality, but because of isolation. Success built on secrecy leaves little room for authenticity. In Golden Age Hollywood, moral clauses existed to protect image, not truth. So ask yourself, was Hudson protected by the system or imprisoned by it? And if the illusion required everyone's participation, who truly benefited from the silence? If Rock Hudson lived inside a carefully maintained illusion, Lana Turner operated in plain sight, but never without calculation. Discovered, as legend tells it, at Schwab's Pharmacy, Turner's origin story became one of Hollywood's favorite myths. A teenage girl in a sweater, spotted by chance, launched into stardom overnight. It was a narrative designed to reinforce fantasy. Beauty found, innocence rewarded. But Hollywood did not run on coincidence. Turner entered MGM at a time when female stars were both commodities and investments. Contracts were restrictive, suspensions were common, refusal could mean disappearance. Within that structure, survival required more than screen presence, it required negotiation. Her 7 marriages made headlines, often framed as instability or excess. Carson, according to those familiar with his private conversations, saw something else. He reportedly remarked that Hollywood was her 8th husband, the one relationship that never ended. Industry veterans have long suggested that many of Turner's early romantic entanglements had professional dimensions, relationships with men who could influence casting decisions, secure better scripts, or elevate her billing. In a system where formal authority was concentrated among male executives, intimacy became one of the few informal channels through which actresses could exercise leverage. Was that exploitation or adaptation? Turner's skill lay not merely in forming relationships, but in selecting them. She reportedly learned quickly which alliances produced results and which did not. She cultivated directors who understood how to frame her strengths. She aligned with co-stars whose influence extended beyond the set. She navigated power like someone who understood its architecture. Carson allegedly admired that clarity, not because it was romantic, but because it was pragmatic. Turner did not pretend the system was fair. She worked within its unfairness, yet her life was not without volatility. The infamous stabbing of her lover, Johnny Stompanato, by her teenage daughter exposed the fragility beneath the glamour. The public spectacle blurred personal tragedy with tabloid consumption. Hollywood thrived on image control, but scandal was always one misstep away. And still, Turner endured. Unlike many actresses whose desirability was treated as temporary currency, she maintained relevance across decades. That persistence suggests something beyond mere beauty. It suggests strategic intelligence. But here is the tension. If relationships are approached as transactions, does emotional authenticity become collateral damage? In Golden Age Hollywood, romantic mythology sold tickets. Behind the mythology, personal alliances sold access. Turner's story forces a deeper question. When a woman uses the only tools available in a restrictive system, is she complicit in that system or quietly resisting it? And if Hollywood was indeed her eighth husband, who ultimately controlled the marriage? If Lana Turner negotiated power, Rita Hayworth was reconstructed by it. Born Margarita Cancino, she entered Hollywood carrying visible traces of her Spanish heritage traces the studio system deemed commercially inconvenient. Under Columbia Pictures, and particularly under studio head Harry Cohn, transformation was not optional, it was mandated. Her hairline was altered through painful electrolysis. Her hair color changed. Her name was Americanized. Ethnicity softened. Identity rebranded. Hollywood did not simply discover Rita Hayworth, it engineered her. According to industry accounts circulated long after the era ended, Cohn's control extended far beyond professional oversight. He reportedly monitored her personal life, dictated social appearances, influenced romantic relationships, and tightly regulated her public narrative. Some insiders even alleged surveillance measures private spaces treated as extensions of the studio's domain. Was this management or ownership? Under the studio system, contracts granted executives extraordinary authority. Suspensions without pay were common disciplinary tools. Morality clauses ensured compliance with public standards. Refusal could mean financial ruin. In that environment, consent was complicated. Carson, according to those who observed his private reflections, viewed Hayworth's story as one of the clearest examples of structural control. She was worshipped as a goddess on screen, yet reportedly lived under restrictions that blurred the line between employer and proprietor. The irony was stark. The very qualities that made her iconic sensuality, allure, glamour, were cultivated through coercive processes, and once perfected, those qualities were commodified relentlessly. Hayworth's famous remark, often quoted years later, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me," captured the fracture between persona and person. The character Gilda symbolized fantasy. The woman beneath the image carried exhaustion. But here lies the unsettling reality. If the audience adored the illusion, did that make them participants in its maintenance? Carson reportedly understood that complicity extended beyond executives. Studios constructed the system, yes, but ticket sales sustained it. The Golden Age was profitable precisely because its myths were desirable. Hayworth eventually pushed back. Marriages to powerful men, including Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, offered temporary shifts in influence. Yet even those relationships did not fully free her from studio entanglements. Power reconfigured, but rarely dissolved. Her later struggles with personal instability and health issues revealed the long shadow of years spent under constant control. When autonomy is negotiated rather than inherent, reclaiming it can feel disorienting. So consider this. If a star's body, image, and private life can be redesigned for market value, where does personhood reside? Was Rita Hayworth elevated by the system or reduced by it? And when Hollywood remade her, what part of her remained untouched? If Rita Hayworth was controlled, Tyrone power negotiated. In the 1930s and 1940s, power embodied the matinee idol, strikingly handsome, charismatic, seemingly effortless in romantic and swashbuckling roles. 20th Century Fox marketed him as the golden boy, reliable, desirable, morally upright. But Golden Age Hollywood did not operate on morality. It operated on marketability. Unlike Rock Hudson, whose identity was concealed under strict orchestration, Power's situation, according to long-circulating industry rumors, existed in a more ambiguous space. Insiders later suggested that studio executives were not entirely unaware of his private life. They simply required discretion. Power reportedly formed close relationships with influential figures, both male and female, whose positions could affect casting decisions and project assignments. These arrangements were never public romances. They were quiet understandings. Carson, as former colleagues have described, was fascinated by this distinction. Hudson lived under denial. Power, by contrast, allegedly operated within tacit approval. Was that freedom, or merely a different form of containment? The studio system thrived on hypocrisy. Contracts included morality clauses designed to project virtue. Publicity departments sold wholesome narratives, yet behind the facade, private accommodations were made if profitability remained intact. Power's image was too valuable to disrupt. As long as box office returns remained strong, discretion functioned as currency. Carson reportedly viewed Power's story as a case study in negotiated survival. He was neither fully trapped nor fully autonomous. He maintained the heterosexual persona required by the market while securing personal latitude under strict invisibility. But negotiation carries risk. When identity becomes a matter of careful calibration, how much to reveal, how much to conceal authenticity becomes conditional. Every alliance must be weighed, every association evaluated for exposure risk. Unlike Hudson, whose life was shaped by fear of exposure, Power reportedly managed a more calculated balance. Yet, calculation is not immunity. It is tension sustained over time. And here lies the deeper contradiction. If studios enforced moral image publicly while accommodating private deviation, what exactly were they protecting? Reputation? Profit? Or the illusion of cultural stability? Power's early death in 1958 prevented long-term reckoning. He remained frozen in the public imagination as the dashing leading man. The negotiation never had to collapse publicly, but the structure that required it remained intact. So consider this. Is survival within a corrupt system a victory or simply a refined compromise? And if the studio allowed certain freedoms as long as they were invisible, was that tolerance or control disguised as tolerance? If Tyrone Power negotiated in silence, Ava Gardner did something far more destabilizing. She spoke without romanticizing the system that made her famous. Among the many stars who passed through Johnny Carson's stage, Gardner reportedly stood apart not because she was scandalous, but because she was unfiltered. She did not cling to the comforting myth that Hollywood rewarded purity of talent above all else. She did not insist that her rise was inevitable. And in an industry built on carefully curated illusions, that kind of honesty was quietly subversive. Discovered almost by accident when a studio scout saw her photograph displayed in a storefront window, Gardner entered MGM without formal acting training or a calculated plan for stardom. She was young, visually arresting, and initially underestimated by executives who saw her beauty before they saw her potential. But Hollywood never underestimated beauty for long. Doors opened quickly, sometimes faster than skill could develop, and with those openings came proximity to power. Her early career was shaped not only by screen tests and casting calls, but by the network surrounding influential men whose positions could accelerate visibility. Carson, according to former colleagues, was not shocked by this reality. What intrigued him was Gardner's refusal to pretend otherwise. She reportedly acknowledged in private conversations that her physical appeal functioned as currency within the studio system, and that access to powerful figures mattered. Her marriages to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and later Frank Sinatra were not merely romantic entanglements splashed across tabloids. They also embedded her within shifting hierarchies of influence. In Golden Age Hollywood, proximity was leverage, and Gardner understood that leverage clearly. Yet what distinguished her was not calculation alone, it was clarity. Unlike contemporaries who later revised their biographies to emphasize talent while minimizing the structural advantages they had navigated, Gardner did not fully erase the transactional elements of her ascent. She seemed to recognize that the system operated on multiple currencies simultaneously: beauty, sexuality, charm, ambition, timing. Talent mattered, but it did not operate in isolation. By admitting that complexity, she destabilized the fairy tale. That destabilization carried risk. The Golden Age depended on belief. Audiences needed to believe that stardom emerged organically from merit. If the public began to see the machinery behind the glamour, the negotiations, the informal alliances, the power dynamics, the illusion weakened. Gardner's candor threatened not because it was scandalous, but because it was accurate. Carson reportedly admired her lack of pretension. In a world built on performance, self-awareness became a kind of quiet rebellion. She did not cloak power in sentimentality or rewrite her beginnings into myth, but honesty did not shield her from consequence. Her turbulent relationship with Sinatra unfolded under relentless public scrutiny. The volatility of fame magnified every emotional fracture. As years passed and Hollywood's appetite shifted toward younger faces, the same beauty that once opened doors became less central currency. And here lies the enduring question. When a woman openly acknowledges how a restrictive system operates, does that transparency grant her agency or hasten her marginalization within it? Gardner's later life suggested a measured distance from Hollywood's core machinery. She had experienced its privileges and distortions without fully surrendering to its mythology. Carson, as some accounts suggest, saw in her something rare, a star who understood the bargain and declined to romanticize it. But inside a culture sustained by illusion, truth can be destabilizing. The more clearly one sees the structure, the harder it becomes to perform inside it. Was Gardner liberated by her clarity, or quietly isolated by it? And if the Golden Age required collective belief to survive, what happens when one of its brightest figures simply refuses to pretend? By the time Gable was known as the King of Hollywood, his rise appeared effortless. He embodied rugged masculinity, quiet authority, and an almost mythic sense of dominance that felt innate rather than constructed. Films like It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind did more than elevate his status, they transformed him into a national archetype. To audiences, he represented proof that charisma and talent alone could ascend to the very top of the industry. His success seemed to validate the Golden Age promise. Greatness would always find its throne. But crowns are not discovered, they are built. Before MGM positioned Gable as its most valuable male star, he was a struggling actor navigating a studio system controlled by a small circle of executives, agents, and well-connected insiders. Entry into that world rarely depended on auditions alone. Advancement required introductions, endorsements, and relationships that were never acknowledged publicly. Industry rumors, persistent for decades, suggested that Gable's early career involved strategic alliances with influential figures who could accelerate his visibility and access to meaningful roles. Whether every detail of those accounts is verifiable matters less than the broader pattern they reflect. Proximity to power often preceded recognition of talent. According to former colleagues, Johnny Carson understood this dynamic as structural rather than scandalous. The studio system did not operate on merit alone, it operated on negotiation. What distinguished Gable was not that he may have made compromises early on, but that he eventually transcended them. Once his box office appeal became undeniable, the balance of power shifted. The young actor who once depended on gatekeepers became the indispensable asset studios needed to protect. His leverage increased, his autonomy expanded. The narrative of the self-made king replaced the quieter history of strategic ascent. Success rewrote the origin story. In the Golden Age, profitability sanitized the past. As long as the image sold, the method of construction became irrelevant. Audiences did not see negotiation, they saw destiny. They did not see structure. They saw stardom. Gable's commanding presence on screen reinforced the illusion that his dominance was natural, not engineered. The myth was more powerful than the mechanics. Carson reportedly viewed Gable not as hypocrite nor victim, but as emblem, a symbol of how efficiently the system could refine compromise into credibility. Gable did not merely wear the crown, he made it appear earned beyond question. And that is precisely what made the illusion sustainable. If even the king could be presented as self-made, the entire architecture of Golden Age Hollywood could continue to market itself as meritocratic. But here lies the uncomfortable question. If even Hollywood's most iconic leading man required strategic entry into the system, was merit ever truly the foundation? Or was merit the story told after power had already decided? The Golden Age thrived because audiences believed in inevitability. They believed some people were simply destined for greatness. Gable fit that narrative perfectly. Yet, behind every perfectly fitted crown is a craftsman and a system that decides who gets to wear it. If the illusion feels seamless, few think to examine the seams. And perhaps that was the greatest achievement of all. For decades, Hollywood's golden age has been remembered as a time of elegance, discipline, and timeless greatness. The stars seemed larger than life, yet somehow morally intact. Their success appeared inevitable, their beauty natural, their power deserved. It was a comforting narrative, one that suggested talent always rises and destiny always rewards. But behind every polished image stood negotiation. Behind every self-made legend stood a system of gatekeepers. Behind every carefully protected reputation stood silence not only from studios, but from journalists, agents, colleagues, and sometimes even audiences who preferred the myth over the mechanics. Johnny Carson did not create that system. He simply sat close enough to it to hear the truth when the cameras stopped rolling. What he understood, and what many in the industry privately acknowledged, was that Golden Age Hollywood was not built on innocence. It was built on control, on proximity to power, on strategic alliances that rarely appeared in official biographies. That does not erase talent. It does not deny charisma. Many of these stars were extraordinary, but talent alone was never the full story. The real illusion was not scandal hidden in shadows. It was merit presented as destiny. It was power framed as inevitability. So perhaps the Golden Age was never purely golden. Perhaps it was simply better managed, and if the myth endured for so long, it may be because we wanted it to.